Welcome to Mr. Marr's 3-Minute History. Quick summaries about a range of different historical topics. Today we're going back to the time of the First World War, and we're looking at one of the key events from that, which was the Christmas Truce in 1914. This is an event often spoke about and sometimes misunderstood. In order to understand what happened at the truce, it's important to think a bit about the run-up to Christmas. There was an issue with morale at this time. Many soldiers in the British Army had signed up under the belief that the war would be relatively short. Indeed, the phrase "over by Christmas" was often used to imply that any soldier signing up would not be away for long. And thus, when it became obvious that the war was not going to end any time soon, around Christmas time many soldiers were worried about what would actually happen. At this time, the Pope had called for what he said was a truce of God and encouraged all sides to stop fighting over the Christmas period and negotiate a peace, although this was ultimately rejected. In order to try and improve morale, there were different steps taken. Britain's king had sent a Christmas card to all soldiers, and his daughter, Princess Mary, had been involved in trying to organise gifts to be sent to soldiers, such as tobacco and chocolate and other things. When Christmas Eve came, ultimately the fighting was still continuing, but there was some signs of Christmas. Some soldiers on both sides had tried to give basic decorations in the trenches. This included German soldiers putting up makeshift trees. In addition, the night before Christmas, both sides had been involved in singing. The Germans had sang Stille Nacht, and the British had sang their own version, which was Silent Night. But whilst they may have done so, the fighting very much continued. And then came Christmas Day. The reality was that in most of the trenches fighting continued, but in some areas there were signs of truce. Some people on different sides began to try and essentially make friends with the other side by doing things such as waving white flags, or even leaving the trenches with hands raised in the air to indicate that they were not a threat. Soldiers on the other side very often believed that this was a trap and there was a real threat. However, as more soldiers began to enter no man's land, it became clear that this was a genuine truce, and eventually more and more came out, and the soldiers from both sides began to socialise. They would do things such as give each other gifts and share items like cigarettes, chocolate, and in particular the British liked the German beer. There was even some impromptu, although disorganised, games of football that took place. Both sides also took this opportunity to collect and then bury many of their dead who had been lost in no man's land. Ultimately this could not continue though, and eventually the truce came to an end. The two sets of soldiers went back to their own trenches, and in some places there was even agreements that they would not fire at each other again that day. But it's worth noting that the fighting had very much continued in other parts of the war, and many soldiers died on Christmas Day as well. Later on though, the generals were furious at what had happened. They worried that if the soldiers believed they could take a truce on Christmas Day, that this could be continued and more would refuse to fight. As such, any future truce was banned, and anyone engaging in this would be subject to court-martial.